Welcome to the Future Generations Podcast, providing you with the world-changing content necessary to inspire you, your family, and our planet to a life of optimal health potential. We'll help you make the choices that powerfully influence the lives you bring into this world. It's time to strengthen our resolve to do better now and for our future generations with your host, Dr. Stanton Hom.
Okay, welcome to another episode of the Future Generations Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Stanton Hom, and I have with me a very special guest, somebody who I've been following. I've been following Sacred Sons for a while. I've been following this gentleman for a while, and I feel that there's multiple reasons why what he's sharing, especially today, is valuable for our community. But I have with me Kale Ka'alekahi.
Yeah.
Sorry for the broken Hawaiian, but it's a pleasure to have you, especially in the wake of everything that's going on in Maui and in Hawaii and your people specifically. I would say, just to our audience, this will be, I think, the third episode that we've actually talked about what's going on there, because it just seems like there's a media blackout. It seems like there's another acceptable single narrative. There's a lot of governmental just lack of transparency, let alone maybe deep-seated corruption. There is, but something that's really special about this, Kale, is it's the focus on an ancestral people that I believe Future Generations doesn't really have it, although it says it in the title. I don't think we have the roots that you have that maybe talk about. We could talk about the future, but if we don't talk about and recognize and honor the past and the heritage of maybe not just your people, but people and humans in general, I think we miss what's possible for the future. But I would love, before that, to our audience to get to know you both personally and professionally. I would love for you to introduce yourself.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you so much. I so appreciate the introduction and appreciate being here with the community. We were talking earlier. Many blessings to be on this path as a doctor to help families for the past 13 years and to watch these children grow. So thank you for letting me lend a voice to the community that you cultivated. And so for me, I've growing up, in Hawaii and traveling with my family, my mother and my dad, and having different experiences living in Japan. So there's a lot of understanding for me as well, like growing up in Hawaii, having connection ancestrally, knowing my, genealogy, and then also going to like cultural school. So we have halau in Hawaii. There's many different kinds, and they emphasize certain ways of being. But it's also a schooling, right? So you have something to kind of juxtapose or contrast what, general education is, or like public education, private education within the system of our society, right? So you're learning what I have been taught and shared with of like how to be human, and the essence of that isn't necessarily caught an identity of like what's a human, what's not a human in that sense. It's a cultivation of a reciprocal person, not just for, sustainability or regenerativeness, but how do you be in relationship with more things than just what's human centered? So other than human, more than human, non-human, plant, animal, mineral, ethereal. And then also cultivating those relationships through a deeper relationship with how you do with your hands. What are things like chants, olis, songs, dances, craft making, not as hobbies, but as vocations.
Wow.
And also revitalizations. And there's this word I'll get to as well. This of like that, within the words that we use a lot: revitalization, regeneration, re-indigenization, indigenosities. That was really a big part of how I got started. Was looking for mentors, looking for teachers, looking for living examples of what I wasn't seeing in the world when I was at a young age, because we live in a society that does not offer our young ones rites of passage and initiations into adulthood. And we also do not offer them guidance and apprenticeship. It's kind of frowned upon, as if the route for us to become who we need to be within the society as contributing members resides in academia and individualistic pursuits. higher degrees and higher status, therefore means you are more of a person of worth, of value in society. So that's kind of what led me on this path. Was I'm just taking my experiences from growing up and being in mentorship and being in life skills, traditional life ways through the different indigenous lineages that I carry, and bringing it to modern society. So I offer a new old way. And that's kind of how I got started, and then work with sacred sons and this and that. So I hope that helps.
No, it definitely helps, and it's almost like I never really know where our interview is going to go, and the reason why
Yeah.
I have some of the questions that I do is because I mean, especially in the last 3 years, figures pop up,
Yeah.
organizations pop up, and
Yeah.
perspectives pop up, and we end up on a screen together, right? Or you're just like
Yeah.
scrolling with your finger, all of a sudden it's like, how many likes can you
Totally.
get? How many followers do you have? And it's like, oh,
Oh,
there's this
yeah.
made up hierarchy of what society and influencership or whatever is.
Social credit scores,
We all know that it's kind of to some degree pointing in that direction, and
Yeah.
it's crazy, right? It's crazy because the
Yeah.
reality is, if we do, which we all do, as far disconnected as you may be from it, we all have a shared history of what you're talking about, right? That's
Yeah.
how every single uh, of all the peoples, every single people like came into whatever society and whatever structure they were, or whatever
Yeah.
community or whatever tribe they were in, through what you're talking about. And where we are in
Yes.
society is today is, my kid's 4 years old. Next year, she starts kindergarten, air quotes, and
Yeah.
she goes and sits. And this is my thing, right? I'm a chiropractor. It's like
Right.
I watched their what we call neurostructure just get
Yeah.
absolutely like demolished as they
Yeah.
sit all day,
Mm-hmm.
like textbook
Yeah.
learning some sort of indoctrination, some sort of perspective, some sort of thing that is,
True.
you don't even recognize how far off from where we come from you go. And
Yeah.
then you fast forward that one generation and they may never remember what that is. You fast forward that two
Yeah. It's all it
generations and like,
takes.
wait a
Yeah.
minute, like all that kind of bastardization of humanity just becomes normal, right?
Mm-hmm.
Here we
Mm-hmm.
are today.
Normalize it.
Yeah. And
That's all you
so I
know.
appreciate you sharing that, because I don't think, like I said, I don't think we've had anybody on the podcast that has helped us remember who that is. We've had one. There's a woman named
Yeah.
Mary Ruddick, and
Oh, okay.
she's this lady who is a modern day what they call Weston Price, who's this.
Oh, yeah.
So if you understand Weston and
I'm
Price, you
familiar with Weston
understand
Price. Yeah.
like that kind of medical anthropological. Let's understand how people were
Yeah.
before they were kind of
Jaw sizes.
exactly right. And then look at your jaw size. It's like so she's in tribes today.
Yeah.
Yesterday she posted like, this is Africa. When I interviewed her,
Yeah.
she had just gotten back from Greenland, and it was seal season in
Mm.
Greenland, and they
Mm.
she was telling me like, these people are so attuned that
Mm.
they have no words for depression. They don't have words for,
Right.
ooh, I need my space right now. And
Totally.
it's a crazy thing that we have been so accustomed to. So I appreciate you sharing that, because I hope this is a remembering for our people, because largely
Yeah.
the majority of the people who are following us now are the people who have activated in the last 3 years. But I've helped people
Oh.
recognize that the freedom, quote unquote, freedom
Mm-hmm.
movement um, is riding on the backs of, in our community, of mothers of children who've been harmed by the medical system, who've been fighting
Right.
for the rights for a few decades, and then they, which I was humbled to realize was, they're riding on the backs of some of the people that resisted the original medical quote
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
mandates from 200 years ago. And I've met those
Yes.
people, and you're like, whoa, but then let's
Unreal.
go and recognize that it's generations back to our ancestral tribe that we
Entirely.
have been completely pulled away from, robbed
Yeah.
of, and it's time to start remembering that. I really appreciate you coming from
Yeah, definitely.
yeah.
Yeah, beautiful, man. Thank you for that journey too, because it got me thinking, of the remembrance, right, part of it all. And this is something I like to say often, because a lot of the things that I'm doing, I'm kind of like people might have opinions on what it is, but like casting spells, right? So we're being casted upon, right? When we think about our educational system, we're giving it certain words, right, for it to be accepted by a rational mind. But it's, in an ancient way, it's like we're being casted upon with these spells. And so I have my own way of doing it. So I kind of utter phrases over and over and over in different interviews and different things, not because I want to repeat myself and it's redundant and that's the only thing I know. I'm trying to emphasize a certain understanding. And so when I tell people, it's like, you came from people who came from people that were claimed by places, and they weren't doing the claiming. The places claimed them. But what I mean by that is, like, people who came from people is the extent of generation. It's like spiraling, not just a circle. It's dimensional. And so people that came from people. So what is that people? And I don't emphasize simply just the human, because we have to know, like how you're saying, when it was whale season in Greenland, with the lady, and she's going over here. Those people, at one time, their ancestors saw themselves as that whale.
Wow.
Just like people who migrated with the buffalo or the caribou or the seals, they knew their life depended upon them. So they become informed as human beings by the animal or the plant, and then they shape to it. So that's why I say certain things that way. And another thing, like for me, is like when we don't have the knowledge of what came before us, we're left with like an understanding, like a worldview that's limited, right, in scope and in depth. It just is, because we're not looking to the past to face our future. And we have a saying in Hawaii, which is "Kawa mamua, kawa mahope," is that the future is in the past. So the orientation for a kanaka, which I'll tell a story about that word too,
please,
is that the facing, looking towards the past, because we already know that what has happened, and we have histories. That's why genealogy is important. Yet we're facing our future, right? So it's like looking at the seeds that have already been planted. Like you were saying, 200 years ago, there's people still carrying on that fight, but it goes even further back.
Of course.
So when we have that, it's this understanding that there's a perspective that has been hijacked by the authoritarian expansionist, groomed by, this utopian future that's supposed to exist. But it's in the very language, the spells, that utopia is like a place that doesn't exist. The etymology is like does not exist. Yet people are striving for it, right? What kind of people? So when I speak on these things, it might sound like, oh, we need to decolonize, we need to decondition, we need to unlearn. And like, yeah, that's a part of it. But it's also, there's a duality. There also is a re-indigenizing. Yeah. So what I was saying about the which is important, is like, it's a returning again, back to a source, right? And in many fashions, especially like styles of mind, right? There's styles of mind. You can keep going to the source, and it's infinite, unlimited, goes on forever. You can just keep tapping in. But as we know, any place you stay for a while, it's going to feel your impact. And there's going to be a taking just for you to exist. And that's probably one of the most hurtful things, especially, if you come from a home that's claimed you, that you feel longing and belonging to. It's grief. It's grief to know that in order for you to sustain yourself and others around you, the land and the water and the animal is going to feel the pains of your existence. So the returning, right? So the in that is like, there's responsibility too. Right? So then now, once we have this depth of knowing of what we need to do to redo something, the decolonization is like leaving a gap, right? How do we unlearn this? How do we remove this part? But then we also need to fill it in, because nature is going to fill in spaces, especially if there's water. So water is memory. And this is what we are. Our body is water. It's like you're talking about with the children, right? Your daughter can go to school. The neural structure is being demolished, you said, yeah? The water and the fascia is not able to move. It's going stagnant. So the fluidness of their memory and their understanding isn't moving. So then the mind gets captured into kind of like prisons, cages, boxes, compartmentalized, reduced, and reductionist thinking, yeah? So for the re-indigenization, right, at least that I'm proposing, is there are different kinds of minds. So we might interpret, especially nowadays, like ego, super ego, id, and persona. In Hawaii, we have like Unihipili, Uhane, Aka, and Aumakua. right? And then you got like lizard brain, monkey brain, you know, like all these different things. So,
Yeah, yeah.
so I'm saying, hey, what language are we using, and where's it coming from? Again, spell breaking. As much as the spells are happening, we have to spell break them. So maybe we have to start thinking of not just rational or logical, and not that those things need to be removed, but how we bring them into balance. How do we take an understanding of concrete reality that's tangible and visceral in this and ground it steadily, while at the same time carrying the abstract, right? The ethereal, which includes our thoughts and our emotions and our feelings, which make us human. And how do we carry those two things together and see through them and open up our view? So maybe it's more about communal mind, a kinship mind, an ancestral mind, an indigenous mind that needs to be cultivated and spoken to, just like a tree that needs, like a seedling that needs water and nutrients from the soil and sunlight, you know, because we want, I believe, we as a people, especially those of us within the community that you're speaking of and that you are a leader of, I think we're not just looking at sustainability, you know, which to me is kind of like a guise, right? It's a guise of modernity saying we want to stay, you know. It's like we're talking about sustainability, we want to sustain it, and sustaining means it just continues on as it has been. But I think we want regenerativeness. I think we want more of a balance, more of what's inherently who we are, no matter what ethnicity, no matter what nationality. It's like back to the genetic, and how do we enhance that? How do we cultivate that in a way that it is communal, and we can see ourselves as a whole, that radical cultivation of wholeness.
That's
but anyway, that's my TED talk.
It's
Thank you.
welcome to my TED talk.
Yeah, thank you very much.
It's something I've referred to as that apparent dichotomy, right, between the tangible and intangible, the visible and invisible, right? And it's that journey I'm curious about in the work that you've done. When does somebody have to be open, right? Does somebody have to be ready? Does somebody have to be um, inherently accepting of that perspective to be able to move through that, right? Like that if somebody's stuck in rationality, if somebody's stuck in logic, if somebody's stuck in only the thing that they can prove and see and touch and feel versus the opposite, what have you seen with that, like for people, um being able to kind of transcend and transmute into that other aspect?
Yeah, the first thing that comes to mind is, you know, we all have heard this saying, right? Like, what you think become your words become your actions become your habits, and so on and so forth. And so people are addicted to thinking, you know, and even in that way of saying, like, I don't mean to phrase it as an addiction, but we all have habituations to things.
Yeah, of course.
And people's, especially coming into a school system that our society has created, to, you know, herd everybody into like-mindedness, so that now there's public relations, and now everybody does this way, and they think, you know, a certain thing about, because of what they've been told, without ever actually experiencing it. So when I find people that are addicted to thinking, it's not their fault. It actually happens, like, as we know, it actually happens because of the conditioning that has occurred and what has been passed down as the story. This is the authorized version of the story of how people should be. And then you have science attached to it that then, again, encapsulates things as being able to explain it. So it leaves no room for mystery. So what I see tends to happen is the people that are kind of stuck in that, if they don't realize it, then there's going to be a lot of confronting. And they're going to have to be really good at that confrontation, because once they find out that they can't maintain relationships and sustain it, then they're going to be alone. And that's a very scary thing for many people. Is like, the way one of my teachers has told me is that, you know, you're doing really good because in the game of life, you keep getting invited to play. And if you're no longer being invited, then something needs to change.
Wow.
Because you can't sustain yourself by yourself. But in our society, that's what we've created, and that's where the rational mind gets in the way. So when I talk to people like that, mainly, you know, men, because of the brotherhood and sacred sons, they already know they're doing it. but they're helpless because they don't have any other tools or any other context or any other ways of knowing or learning to help them buffer it and come into kind of like a seamless merging, like an
Mm-hmm.
interweaving of those things. So they're coming to learn more about, why am I feeling these feelings and what has happened? Once they tap into that part of themselves internally with the climate of their feelings and emotions and understanding those weather patterns, then the rational mind starts to quiet. So that's probably the most difficult journey, right? It's from the head to the heart. It's literally like 2 feet away, but it's like just taking one step towards it is like, it hurts. So I know most people from the spiritual, woo-woo places are like, it's all love and light. It's just love and light. And I'm like, man, you have too much love and too much light, you get fat, lazy, and sunburned. Trust me, I see a lot of people out here. You know what I mean? Now I'm trying to talk down, but I just mean it's true. Like,
Mm-hmm.
you get too much of that. So what is needed? I think life does need some thresholds, and it's painful, especially primal thresholds of nature. If you want love and light, that's great. You can sit over there, enjoy yourself. And there's those of us that understand that we got to get some work in,
Mm-hmm.
and it's going to hurt. And the people that have a rationality about that, they come around. It'll take them time, but the confrontation of like their allegiances, they have to address it. Why am I loyal to this education I received? Why am I still living out this story? And most times they're kind of questioning that. They're like, oh, I'm living someone else's dream. I'm doing the thing that someone else told me to do because they said it was a good idea. And I haven't actually thought of it for myself because I rationalized doing it. So it's a big cluster of entanglements.
Yeah, it's at one point you look at your analytics and all these numbers and who's listening to you, who's following you. And
Yeah.
at one point, I think it was like 90% was women. And
Mm-hmm.
honestly, that's kind
Mm-hmm.
of that lines up with healthcare, right? Healthcare in a traditional household, 90% of those
Yeah,
decisions are made by women. And
definitely.
mothers especially. And I've always said, like, it's 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 currently the keys to the kingdom because they inherently, well, we just had one of my older patients, right, that's been with me for a long time, who just started her cycle, right, her menstrual cycle.
Yeah.
And I often
Mm-hmm.
hear these things because I'm a doc and I've been part of
Yeah.
their journey for a while, and I was just like, isn't that crazy that most 12-year-old boys are just playing grab ass, like they don't know
Totally.
anything about what's
They're
going on
just
at
going
all, and
around.
then
Yeah.
and you are magically just radically attuned to this cycle that actually just has this deep-seated tie to the
Yes.
moon. And and I just asked her, just very very directly, I said, how long do you think you've known about that cycle? She's like, probably like 5 or 6 years. I was like, that's crazy. I was like, I
Wow.
know I was like, most boys, unfortunately, we hook, line, and seeker bought
Yeah.
into the, let's just play grab ass basically till maybe 40. I don't know what your
Oh,
average
totally.
I don't know what your average intake for a man in Sacred Sons is, into their journey, but it's like it's probably the same demographic, and you're just like, that's
True.
that's wild, right? Because I think women inherently get, because they grow these babies from 2 half cells to 26 billion cells in 9 months and don't have to consciously control any of that process, and
Right.
it's this miracle. And here we are as a society that's largely dictatorial, that's largely hyper rational, that
Mm,
is a little bit more of that quote masculine side of our physiology per se. And in
sure.
the end, it's like it's coming to a head because it's if at best it's half of the picture, right?
Yeah.
And those who are stuck in that love and light, thinking that it's all rainbows and puppy dogs, they're being pressed up against the windshield and the window,
Yeah.
saying, actually, you're gonna have to look at some of this stuff. And so I really appreciate you sharing that, because it
Yeah.
leads
Thank
me to
you.
my next question.
Yeah.
Is I'm always interested in the darkness and the void that fuels people,
Yeah.
especially today. And so could you verbalize, I know we've talked a lot about it, probably, what what may be one of the biggest challenges you see as what we face today?
Yeah. Yeah. Um, there's a multitude of them, and I think at this point right now, what's coming up for me, is vitally important. Is a lot of like what you're speaking on, as well is the ideas around masculinity and femininity, right? And then traditional roles, and men being this and women being that. You know, there was a good book I read a while back. It's like women are from Venus and men are from Mars, you know, kind of thing. And I enjoyed that book. I learned a lot. And then you have, you know, The Way of the Superior Man type of things with David Deida. There's a lot, I think, of this unrooted, destabilized kind of desire to create roles, especially with what's happening. Like now there's a spectrum with genders and all of this. And for me, the cultural understanding is all inclusive. You know, we have words like two spirit, we have words mahu in Hawaiian, like it's a meeting of what that is, because everybody has a purpose within the society and a role. So one of the big things for me is that people don't know how to fulfill those roles because they haven't had a different culture that knows how to be in reciprocity with life, and they don't know how to grieve, and they don't know how to have appraising for the life that they already have. So the functioning of our society continuously goes. And that's what I was saying about sustainability as being like a primal cry of modernity, the modern self, for permanence. But then there needs to be a kind of regeneration, right? Generations we're talking about, a regeneration that composts all of that, composts the ideas of permanence and all of that. So there needs to be a grieving of what we've lost before, what has been taken from us, what has been stripped from us, and to understand that. So what is being birthed anew can carry what modernity is trying to push forth. And that's a big problem right now, you know, because I don't see a lot of that being spoken. I see more about this inclusivity is a demand rather than an understanding. And the ideas that there is hyper masculinity in our society. I'm not saying those things are wrong, but the approach is disguised as virtuous when it's really vengeful.
Wow.
You know, and so I'm thinking to myself, in order for us to move together, there needs to be another culture of awakening, an emergent culture of awakening coming. And I believe it's happening through these conversations, but we need to cry more, you know? Yeah.
It's and I'd be remiss if I didn't just jump into the topic, because
Yeah.
it was your videos about the people of Lahaina and the ancestral lineage of the actual land
Yeah.
that made me so just want to pay more attention to you, because there's a bunch of people that are talking that it's awesome, and I really appreciate the people that are brave enough to share about what's happening out there that's outside of outside of the narrative, that's actually not being covered by the media, right? That's
Totally.
actually not being talked about by our government officials, that you know, if you really want to look at from an administration perspective, like, when is that federal government actually going to support, you know, the 50th state, you know? And in the end, it's like, I felt like your message just about how many generations and the ancestral nature to the actual physical, but very, like you're saying, very ethereal cultural land, that I thought was, it's just missing. It's missing. It was important to highlight, yes, for this particular event and this particular tragedy, but it's also
Totally.
just important for the broad spectrum of humanity at large. So could you share a little bit more about that?
Yeah. This is a good question. I just want
Of course. Of course.
beautifully articulated, eloquent. I was like, yeah, totally. And then I actually am like, I have a number of ideas. So what is the more succinct thing you might be asking?
Like,
Because
maybe
I'll hit a lot.
maybe in the wake of what you just shared, just about
Yeah.
how we're at this point in society and in the timeline of humanity, that we've been so hyper material, hyper rational, hyper logical, and you're just like, hey, we actually have to recognize there's this whole other side of the ethereal nature, the feeling
Yes.
nature, the
Totally.
intangible, invisible, a visceral nature, but also just like, hey, we gotta cry, you know, and like, and
Yeah,
the
we do.
grieving, you know, and I just felt like there was a connection in that subject matter.
There is. So one of the things that is important along those lines of like how you're saying with the ethereal way is that, you know, you don't have to be an expert in the knowledge of the processes of other cultures, right? But you can be yourself as an expert upon the culture that you haven't been really aware of that you're in, right? Like, there's, maybe expert isn't the right word, but like, you know, being a custodian of reality kind of thing. So for me, making videos about Lahaina and the water and all of this, many different people will see it, and they're going to project upon it whatever is there. I'm simply lending a voice to these things so that there can be a reception of metaphor, which is like the language of spirit. And so when we cultivate that kind of a language, there's this way of saying like talking in circles. It's like the direct speech doesn't like that, because it wants to transfer information. It wants to get stats and facts and, you know, all these things. But then when you come into the layers of story and metaphor, now there is a speaking about gesture, you know, speaking about song and chant and all of these things. That is the language of the spirit, because it doesn't have to be so concrete in the way that it's immovable. There needs to be a fluidity to it. And so, like I was saying, is that you don't have to be an expert on culture to know the culture that you've been of, so that you can have a lens, a taste for other people's existence and their reality of what it means to belong somewhere. Wow. So you become a custodian of reality, and we need to, we need to step into that. And so when I speak about, for example, restoring ancient ponds and marshlands and waterways for the land, it's not about, the interpretation of, oh, I want to remove everything that was post-colonial, plantation era. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm saying that there is a way for us to create more life in the places of how they naturally want to be. I'm saying let's not disrupt what nature already wants to do. That's inherently part of why we exist. Rather than continuously taking from that, we want to give back into it so that the loop closes, that feedback loop closes. So once again, the circle is complete.
Of course.
The straight speech just keeps going. And there's no end in sight. It's relentless. They'll just keep going into the future. But then if you talk in circles, you bridge the past into the present, which then can invoke an imagination, an imagery of the pictorial language for people to then move about differently, right? They can move differently, but it takes time. So that's why I talk about land and water in these ways. It's like, let's give a little information, but then let's also ask questions, because wondering about these things is more important than having answers. Yeah. I think there's a gift in the disorientation. I think there is a gift in not having coordinates, but then you also have to become a wayfinder in that. So when it comes to place and story, that's what indigenous is about. It means being of a place, born of, native to. And to me, I'm wondering, when do everybody begin to accept that? Those who identify as indigenous included. I think to myself, like, maybe that's the issue, that we've created a barrier between who's native and non-native. Like, we've created a barrier between what indigenous looks like and what it doesn't look like, and who a colonizer looks like and who they don't look like. And I think that's a big issue too, amongst the grieving. We have to cry about that, because we're all orphans. I don't come here looking like, oh, I'm just Hawaiian this and native that. No, I've got ancestry from Europe too. They were indigenous people as well. They were a tribal people who they themselves were quote unquote colonized, and they're having a resurgence for themselves too. So when I go and I travel, I come as a guest to be hosted, and the two are vice versa. Good host, good guest. Good guest, good host. So when I go to these places, I'm saying, oh, this is the other side of the story, right? Because I'm living in one American lens as a Hawaiian person, quote unquote, and then going to Europe, where the bulk of the story I've received is like, oh, this is the source of the issues, And I'm like, oh no, that happened to them too. Because ancient civilizations started it, like Sumeria, And then we have other civilizations who came through, just to name a few. Rome, that like kind of, perfected the thing. And then you have the British Empire, who then spread it everywhere. And then you have the Americans, who are just, taking it along for a ride, and instigating the new evolution of it. So I'm wondering to myself, when does the place-based knowledge come through, and what is it going to do for the people? So share the story. And it might be a little ethereal for some, but then others, again, they'll like acclimate.
Maybe more directly, maybe I'm speaking in the circles that get people lost, but
Yeah.
it's so tell me about how the quote fires in Lahaina,
Yeah,
maybe through that lens, right? Because
absolutely.
that story is I felt like when you were sharing through
Yeah.
that lens, I was like, oh, this is exactly what's happening, regardless of
Yeah.
what regardless of the cause, regardless of all the aspects of things, like it felt like whether the land grab thing or the
Yeah.
just the robbing and the stealing from or colonizing or in the most
Yeah.
modern way. Could you share through that lens about some of
Yeah,
that?
absolutely.
Please do.
So this story begins a long, long time ago, in a planet that we call Earth, that somehow we're all living on, and gives abundantly radical indigenous hospitality of water. And it
Wow.
just so happens that West Maui is the second or like fourth wettest place in the world. I think there's like 3 locations in the Hawaiian Islands that are top 10 wettest places in the world.
Wow,
And
man.
West Maui, as we say in English, it's Maui Komohana, is what we call. In there is a mountain called Pu'ukukui. Kukui is also a tree. It's known as a candle nut tree. And we use this tree to make oils that are good for skincare, and also for lamps. You can use for lamps, and you can burn them. And that's how we used to tell time, is like the husk of the kukui. You'd burn, and that's how we tell time. We didn't have watches, right? So
Wow.
that mountain or mauna we call Pu'ukukui, that peak, like right around there is a bog, on the Eke. And that bog collects all this water and then distributes it throughout Maui Komohana. However, so that way of being is there's a lot of like lavitude and this and that. There's a whole ecological, beauty of life sustaining design, life regenerative design, that nature just does. So originally, that land where Lahaina is, had another name, like Malu'ulu Olele, which means in the safety or refuge of breadfruit trees, of Lele, the leaping place. This is where a lot of people would come, so to trade and to barter. So that whole land was actually full of breadfruit trees that were groves. So it was agroforested by wild tending and traditional lifeways. So there's marshlands that were out there, Lahaina. It was known as, right, the Venice, as they say, of the Pacific, because there was a lot of waterways all throughout Lahaina. So that was then. The kingdom gets created in 1810 by Kamehameha. Depending on who you ask, he's either the great unifier or the great conqueror. Because by his way of coming through the islands, he used Western weapons, Western ways, and also took and hijacked and adopted into his way other lineages and genealogies, while at the same time eradicating them.
Wow.
So on Maui, it created a lot of women and families without men, because Maui was one of the main places that that stood up against him, and he killed a lot of the men. So guess who comes? Other foreign men, other immigrants, and then they start to acquire the land. Long story short, sugar plantations arrived with Protestant missionaries from the United States. It started out as small farms, and then it got larger. These are very thirsty plants, especially these kinds of sugar that cane that they wanted to grow. Because we in Hawaii, we already had sugar cane. We call coal, but we had different types. This one specifically is to make processed sugar for profit. So it needs water. So what they did is they created irrigation ditches, and systems that would siphon and divert the waterway to then only concentrate on the plantation. So by doing so, that created all of the dry, arid landscape that's there. And because there wasn't enough water, the indigenous plants and grasses died off, especially because they brought ranching too. So all that's got eliminated. So now you have a recipe, a disaster for large fires, especially after 100 years. And when that water isn't being put onto the land for sugarcane, they develop it. So now it's just buildings in places that they're not supposed to be with very little amounts of water. Because even the municipal water for Lahaina, which is owned by the county, they only have so much water given because they have underground pumps that can only get so much, and shallow water that they pull from, where all the major water is being tracked out to these giant resorts, right? Into these golf courses, and everything's green out where the water is going. And that's because from the plantation time, the next predecessor are corporations, whether they be land development companies, real estate agencies, whoever. So that is from that lens, when you think about the beauty that Lahaina had because of the water that was there, and then the sequence of the haunting sequence of the hungry ghost nutrient of sugar that takes and takes and takes. What do you think the consequences will be? And again, I'm not saying what's right or wrong or good or bad. I don't function with that. I say, what's the possibilities and the consequences? Well, the possibility is that you're going to keep growing this ghost nutrient that does nothing for the human body other than decay it. We talk about Weston A. Price, right? Once the people start eating the bread and the sugar and the processed cheeses, everything starts to get narrow, and the teeth start to rot out, and the eyes get bleary, you know, and the nose starts to thin and get longer out because it's not taking in enough air. It's like, that's what's happening to human beings by this thing. If the land is sick, the people will be sick. You control the water, you control the land, you control the land, you control the food, you control the food, you control the people. And that's what's happened. And so this fire, to me, there's lots of, you know, oh, it's direct energy weapons. It's up there on Haleakala. This thing's going down like this. And like, I understand, yeah, there is weaponized incompetence that has gone on. Gross negligence upon the people that we put into leadership to guide us and to protect us, and they weren't there. And that's true. Are they evil? I don't know. Are they part of some strange scheme that's a bigger story that involves all these giant corporations like BlackRock and this and that? Possibly. I'm very much aware, but that's not what I'm citing myself in. I'm saying, look to the past once again to understand what we need to do in the future. Because this tragedy, this disaster, artificial or natural, it still happened. People's lives have been lost, and the things that their possessions, the things that made their life and their experiences for their children, for their families, is gone. And there's a mass exodus happening now. The coping mechanisms of the society are not there. We have not been able to build up a structure that allows for social responsibility for good mental, spiritual, and emotional health. So now we have people, you know, coping with drug addictions and alcoholism and suicide. And then also to be displaced once again from your home, from generations, many of these people, and now they're moving to California, Texas, Nevada, and Washington. You see, so from that lens, again, it's like history is repeating itself. And now we're being haunted by those things, all because of sugar. You know?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I hope that was a little bit more informative. And, you know, there's spiritual layers to that too, but in the physical, you know, we had native grasses that were living out there, and those grasses, they're able to grow, they're more robust, they're drought resistant, and they're able to hold moisture in the soil. So when the water did come, it would flourish, and trees can be sustained by those grasses. But once you bring ranching in, and the cows, they are going to eat up everything. And there's like no turning back once you do that. So we got to look at this too, this last piece. When people see Maui, they're like, how beautiful. It's so wild, like pristine. This is paradise. And I'm like, yes. And she is carrying scars that if you have the eyes to see, you'll know. And it's not just Maui. I mean, if you have the eyes to see, everywhere you go, you'll understand it. Our home has been logged out for 100 years, and then ranched over, and then plantation and development. That is the haunting sequence that I talk about when it comes to colonization, you know? So it's like, man, how much crying can we do? I say not enough.
Yeah.
And not crying just to like sit down and weep and what's that called? Wallow in the pain. I'm saying cry with the ability to keep moving, because there's more seeds that need to be planted, you know?
It was a couple interviews ago. There was a gentleman who I've been very, very inspired by, and he was talking
Yeah.
about the concept of water, and I
Yeah.
think through a completely different lens. He was like, in the continental U.S., there's 52,000 man-made lakes, and there is
Uh,
no natural water source for them. They fill them and drain them
uh,
on control, on command, and so he's like, there's actually no drought. There's no such thing as a drought. He's like,
right?
underneath the earth is oceans upon
Mm-hmm.
oceans. And I think what you're sharing is that the
Yes.
lightest place in the world, and that's maybe what the value of, Mother Earth is in general, is like, where is that ultra abundance of water,
Mm-hmm.
which is what he said is the myth, right? The myth of these lakes is that they could,
Yeah.
through water, is just create this scarcity mindset, and you don't even recognize that water is the earth's, and water is
Mm-hmm.
humanity's, right? And water's nature, and it's not
Totally.
it's not municipal. it's not
No.
it's
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
Fiji, bro.
Exactly.
It's not
Yeah.
this guy. It's like
Yeah.
we all
Yeah.
just drink the water and we bottle the water, and it's like, holy cow, like that's crazy that you go back all the way to the beginning of your people, and that was the thing that was the main driver for all of this colonization, all of
Yeah.
this, now
Yeah.
corporatocracies and whatever you want to
Oh
call it
yeah.
now.
You
It's
got me
like,
thinking, man.
it's crazy to say, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
I felt it this way, like, why are people not talking about Lahaina? I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But why is it so important? Like you said, regardless of what the source is,
Mm-hmm.
regardless if there's nefarious players, which we know that it's
Mm-hmm.
not if,
They're
it's
right.
who, right? It's what type,
Mm-hmm.
it's how deep, it's how dark, how evil.
100%.
And and that's something I've had to reconcile, because maybe I was one of those guys that was love and light.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had to really feel into the fact that there is a darkness that is there,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
that has these intentions, that if we don't remember, if we don't, like you're
Yep.
saying, regenerate, revitalize, re-indigenize, like, we will be faced with another, and it can happen anywhere in the world, right? Where,
Yeah.
why it was targeted, you're saying, oh yeah, there's a value here, and they could wage
Yeah.
and wield whatever power that they are to create a situation where they will then implement,
Yes.
indoctrinate and bring in whatever it is that they want to.
Transhumanism.
Oh, there it is. But that's it,
It
right? Right.
is.
I don't know how far down that route you want to go, but
Yeah,
it's crazy, right? It's
it
crazy.
is. Truly. Well, I will tell you this, like being on the ground and out there, because the fires are going on in Kula and helping out over there. No emergency relief in the sense of like when something does happen, we don't have water filters here. Like we don't have water systems and then like support. So already I'm questioning. Then I go out to Lahaina and I'm like, they have nothing, like there's nothing to prepare for any of this. And we've known about this going like for like 50 years
Hmm.
about the possibility, because there was fires previously, eventually there's going to be one big one. So the first things that they also get out there when this happens, right? Generators, like big time, water systems, different types of contractual work is like being handed out. And then also Starlinks all over.
Wow.
And it's like, what clearer sign,
Hmm.
that it's headed that way, because now everybody wants one. And this is about, we're going to talk back again in the circle, is the conditioning, whether you're aware of it or not. So that's one of the things that's been very privy to for me, like with the work that I do when it comes to working with people's emotional body and their mind and things like that, is that they might think that they have gotten over it, or they may have habituated or unlearned something, but it's in the critical moments when you're not knowing it and least expecting it, that you are doing its bidding.
Wow.
And that's where I see kind of the trail, right, of like all of this. It isn't necessarily um I think nefarious for somebody to have Starlink, but that it would be such a widely available and everybody should have it. And guys that I know that I'm close with are like putting it out there and getting people as many Starlinks as they can so they can be in communication. So in its first initial contact, it seems, what is that word? Seems like okay, like everything's good. But yeah, so anyway.
That's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah, it's crazy, man.
Because it's there to help, right? It's like
It is.
we're gonna help you connect again. We're gonna help
Yeah.
you with this particular.
Yeah.
Oh
The
man,
saving aspect.
that's so. Tell me, because
Yeah.
we could get lost down that route, and I think
Oh,
I
totally.
appreciate you sharing that because you have this gift, man. You have this gift of being able to go into the expansiveness of the conversation, into the depth of where we must look, but then also just be like, oh yeah, direct energy weapons, I got that. Yeah, Starlink, yeah, we got that. Like, there could be, World Economic Forum guys, yeah, BlackRock, yeah, no, we got that. So
Yeah.
I want people to know because that's where people get caught. They get
Yeah.
caught in that, and we should recognize that, and that should be
Totally.
a thing that's always in the picture because we just know at this point that it's there. It's just where, right? But I'd love for you to maybe continue that conversation through a different lens now, right? Where
Yeah.
void equals value, right? Challenge leads to
Mm.
some sort of purpose, right? And I feel like
Mm-hmm.
you have this depth of purpose that I am very inspired by, and I feel very much is necessary for my community to hear. But could you verbalize what that mission and that purpose that you find yourself on is?
Beautiful. Hmm. It's so interesting. Okay, so yes, there's such a wide range of ways we can experience things because obviously most of the information I receive when it comes to this is what has been passed down to me and what I know, what I've experienced in my life. And a lot of times in speaking to people about certain things, it's almost like their ignorance has to have equal consideration to my knowledge and experience.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure as to why.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm understanding for myself that the purposefulness for me is to be multifaceted, diverse, and able to connect. So there's maybe a sense of accessibility and availability. Maybe there's a maturity that includes insecurity. Maybe there is purpose and a direction. You know what I mean? Like we can
Mm-hmm. Yep.
flesh out these words. So the purposefulness that I find in all of it is that I want to revitalize the indigenous soul for people. Not that I know exactly what it is, but that there is a pathway that is steadily being unlocked. And this is a little controversial thing as well. Like when it comes to Lahaina and how that place was created, and over the generations, it's like, people are residing there, they're living and having their families. But in the Ike Kupuna, the knowledge of our ancestors, of what they saw, Nana Ike Kumu looking to that, they knew that shouldn't have been there because of the possibility of a disaster such as that happening. So are we really listening and paying attention to that? And that's kind of what my feeling is, my duty. Like when I put in my bio, I'm like cultural innovator, spiritual activist, radical visionary. Those are just little labels that I keep saying because I see every person that I come across, like yourself, as being that, right? It's not like I have a steady track of what's going on. No, I'm tracking it, but I need your eyes too. And I need you to hear your story and I need you to speak it so that I know where to go with all of that. Because that's what encapsulates, again, the kin mind, the communal mind, the ancestral mind. So that's kind of my role, I believe, is just to be a bridge of the things that have come into the past and not be stuck there and bring into the present again. Yeah. And some form of an identity that can imagine a world, imagine a society, imagine a community, imagine a village that would be here for the future. And that means the generations coming, future generations, right?
So given that, right, I thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Again, not 215 episodes, not one person has come from this lens. And
Yeah.
I find it to be one of the most catchword essential, right?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe future pace that world for me. What does that world look like when you see that revitalization,
Yeah.
this mission, this fruition of it? What does that look like for you?
Oh man, it's so good. It's okay. I tell you a little story that
Of
happened to
course,
me
man.
while I was
Of
out in
course.
Scotland.
Yeah.
So there was there I have a team, right? That it's about 22 guys that I lead with other co-leaders of mine. And they're within the 22 out there in Scotland, we had 20 different nations represented within that small group. And I'm just like, wow, this is the vision,
That's
that I
amazing.
wanted to
That's beautiful.
see.
Yeah.
Was like, we're all here together. We're here to do this work, to understand ourselves as men within the society. Masculinity needs to come through by more bodies coming into contact. That was the prayer years ago. Here I am finding myself in Scotland at a giant manor that's been passed down from 14 generations. The guy that's there is still the descendant caretaking that place. And my mind is being blown, right?
Yeah.
And then there's another younger man, but early 20s. He's tall, blonde hair, blue eyes, speaks German, I think like 3 languages. Okay. And I'm just amazed in the sense of like, okay, he's so young, he's entering into this space already. And he had a question, to ask for me and my other good friend. His name is Hunter Torin. He and I, we like to innovate cultures together, and kind of intermesh with one another. He asked this question, and I'm just going to speak to how it felt to receive it from him. It was a beautiful articulation. It was like a courtesy that he would ask such a question to us. He was like, I've seen many things, I've gone around and I've learned a lot, but I'm still confused as to what's really happening, because I see that there is a future before me, but I can't really put my finger on it. And it gets frustrating at times. And maybe I do want to ask you this question, but it makes me feel vulnerable and unsure, because I don't know if me even asking will be received well, or that you'll perceive me as not knowing. So my frustration is kind of lending me towards wanting to ask, not needing a direct answer, but in hopes that you can help me figure out a little bit more as to where this trail is that I'm headed towards, because I'm desiring a village. I'm desiring connection and community. I'm having a difficult time seeing what that is. But climate change and I'm permaculture and like all and so that's in his question. And so receiving it, I say, the sense that you have of what a community could possibly be and what that future holds for you can only be told by more times you speak it and tell it out loud, and not being afraid to ask and to wonder aloud. I feel like my role of perceiving a younger man like that with kind of clenched fist, but like an open spirit, because he's trying to figure it out, and he knows it's there because there's something missing, but he's never experienced otherwise. So it goes back to the ways that all of us have been orphaned. There needs to be a fostering. So in the sequence of what I see is the younger ones being able to see living examples like you and I doing what we're doing, and then them interpreting it along as they go, and us being alongside them saying, what do you see? Like, this is what I'm seeing. Okay, how does it feel? It feels like this. Empty or full? Feels very empty. How do we fill it? Here. How do we empty it? So that way the generations coming, they're not being told how to be. They're not going to fulfill our dreams and our imaginations. We're going to guide them along their own walk so that they can determine it with guidance with us. So then now that translates differently. And it's something I haven't seen before. It's something that I haven't been shown, because even in the traditions that I follow, it's dogmatic too. It's already, the lens is like, this is what you need to see and perceive in order for you to move through the ceremony and to get to the destination that we've decided. So I'm trying to do something I haven't seen before. That's why it's a little hard for me to like, it looks just like this. But I think that's the secret of it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Is that you're not supposed to know. Like that's how you know you're in it, is because you're participating, you're fulfilling a role, but you don't know what it's going to be, because it's not for you or I. It's for these, these babies you watch grow up for the past 13 years. That's what it's for, It's for these younger ones, because I still have a hope for them. And I feel like where we're at,
Yeah.
we have to be adults now. and we have to fulfill the things that they're asking for us, not what we want for ourselves. It's kind of like what you said in the beginning about like, yeah, you know, you just grab assing around till you're 40. We ain't got time for that.
Mm-mm.
We really gotta like show up, like, and give presence to the thing and some breadth and some depth. You know?
It reminds me of like one of the first interviews I had with a midwife. Um,
Yeah.
and she went through these 5 great powers,
Mm.
and all of them just kind of made sense, like great certainty, great
Yeah.
hope. And there was one that sat with me that I had some resistance towards, and I think you're speaking to it to some degree, and it was great doubt. And
Mm.
and I think it was more when she kind of expounded on it. It was a great humility, it was a great, being
Bro.
comfortable with the fact that we don't have to know everything,
Yeah.
but she was saying specifically through the lens of birth, where a mother will sometimes verbalize like the doubt, will verbalize
Yeah.
that in that dark space, or in
Right.
that pain, or in that trauma, or whatever it is that she's going through, that there is a verbalization expression of a physical, non-physical, ethereal doubt in the future, because she just doesn't know.
Yeah.
And I appreciate you sharing
Totally.
that as a man, because men are meant to know. We're supposed to be certain. We're
Totally.
supposed to like have all the facts, and we're supposed to just push forward. And it's
Yeah.
a really important um balance.
Yeah.
I want to honor you for your emotions too, because
Yeah. Thank
it
you.
is the soul of our um whatever you want to call it, chiropractic clinic,
Yeah.
podcast, business, company, community, movement, whatever you want to call it, that this last year I have felt like I got to the limit of what I could know. And I felt like it's now just being a vessel, and it's now
Mm.
just honor, like offering an opportunity for people like you to come in and be like, hey,
Yeah.
this is my view,
Yeah.
and like you're saying, it's going to take um I don't want to call it like a sense of urgency per se, because you're saying it right, like, do we really have that time?
Yeah.
But it's also this moment where you're not like um hyper vigilant, you're not
Right.
overly like frantic. You're
Yeah.
standing with each other, you're standing in community with people, you're inviting and offering and asking questions to help maybe elicit a greater awareness, like you're saying.
Yes,
It's a
brother.
beautiful thing, man. It's a beautiful concept of that
Yeah.
ancestral mind that
Mm-hmm.
I feel very much is blessing my community right now. I really, really
Oh, brother.
appreciate you sharing that,
Thank
because
you,
we
man.
don't, like I said, 215 episodes, and we have not had this perspective, and it's one of the most powerful ones that I believe is going to
I'm
give
honored.
people some of the things that um, help just bring that awareness and give them
Yeah.
the steps forward that they may be a little bit lost in finding right now. It's beautiful, man.
Thank you,
What would
brother.
you say is one thing that you would invite our community to do?
Oh man. Beautiful. You know, I have a sense that some of the deepest work that we could possibly do, you know, as human beings is to gather together and to make
Mm,
space, you know,
I love it.
for each other, especially for the forgotten things and the denied things.
Mm,
For us each to help and assist in even partial ways for this recuperation, you know, of vitality and vital connections to elements, you know, time and space, to more than human, to land, you know, to air, you know, to sky, to stars, to clouds, you know, and they say like, oh, you got your head in the clouds. You
wow.
know, it's kind of spoken about as like, ah, you're just out there dreaming, you ain't doing. And I'm like, some of the greatest signs is up there,
Mm,
you know, looking at them clouds. Some of the greatest messages comes from things above and right down below, seeing, you know, even the little critters that are moving. And, you know, the shot clock is ticking, my friend. Yes, indeed. You know, but the way I've learned and has been taught to me, the world has ended a long, long time ago.
wow.
And I'm just waiting now for the communities to come and to arise, to awaken the world again and to play the drumbeat of that heart and soul once more for the human being again to arise as the tender of the wild of these places,
Wow,
to
man.
garden our planet. So continue on, my brother.
Wow.
You know, it's a beautiful responsibility to open profound places of conversation for myself and you and others. Thank you.
I think it's like I said, I think it's a blessing. I think it's amazing, and I think the fine balance between like that conviction and certainty and confidence, but also the humility in the unknown, and being able to sit in that unknown is a beautiful thing. How do people find you? How do people connect?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for that too. And I have my website, which is just my name, KaleKa'alekahi.com. It's also my IG tag is kale.ka'alekahi, and so is my TikTok. So I was just like,
cool.
You know, the name is there, and if you want more information, go to those. You want to see some of my funny videos and more information. But my name too is important. Like, since people are, you know, if they're interested in looking, is Ka'ale, and it means like a billowing or a rising, kind of like the crest of a wave or like clouds that billow up. And then Kahi means one or first. So in one way, it can mean first wave, first crest of the wave, first cloud, which is like a navigator name. But also that Ale can mean a welling up, like water rising to the surface. It's like Kahi is one. So a welling up of water to the surface, like tears in the eyes welling up. So it also means first to cry.
It's a beautiful metaphor, right? Beautiful metaphor for everything we talked about with right? It's beautiful, man. Thank you again, Kale. It is it's an honor. I had this deep calling to reach out to you, and I'm grateful that my team was able to do that.
Yeah,
and
me too.
I always have, you know, they say have no expectations. I always have some, and it just way more expansive and way more beyond that I could ever imagine. Thank you so much, man.
Hey, mahalo nui. Thank you so much, Vivalo. All the way.
We appreciate you joining us for this episode of the Future Generations podcast. Remember to rate, review, and subscribe on iTunes and Spotify. For more resources based on today's episode, as well as more ways to inspire a brighter future for you and your family, visit us at thefuturegen.com. That's all available exclusively on thefuturegen.com.